The capsule slowly drifted towards the planet Mars, whilst inside Ken Wakeman, a disabled man in a wheelchair, grappled his way across the unfriendly surface of the capsule till he got up close to one of the portals. He looked at the darkness with the same kind of expression as one would imagine he would with any ordinary object. He grumbled to himself, muttering noises to avoid that had no sound to carry his angry voice. The doctor sat with Flint Jones, who still had not voiced a word himself. But the optical side of him was more advanced than the previous night, as he was looking around the capsule at every corner, much like that of a child, with a kind of genuine innocence. One wondered whether the time of his awakening to the new world he would have to accept would be so much that he might never again be the same Flint Jones he might once have been. In the corner, eating a bowl of cereal much like any other day, was a woman who also had not spoken, and was the only person who had yet to give her name or even attempt to speak with the others. I was unsure why, but Ganymede led me to believe that this was a sign of shock, and would soon subside, and then she would be able to speak 10 to the dozen. I walked towards the wheelchair-bound Ken Wakeman. "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it?" I said poetically. "Are you out of your mind? What is so beautiful about a sheet of black spotted with a few dots of white? Even the shallowest of human beings, it is no more beautiful or aesthetic than a child's first scribble." As he spouted out his sentences, I was struck by the very anger that each word he announced received. His anger seemed to know no bounds. His fiery eyes and eyebrows burnt with every syllable. His fist clenched his wheelchair, as if he derived his anger from some unknown source. I left his conversation at this and moved back to where I had once stood. It struck me strange that all this way out one still could find disagreeable people and arguments. I looked across to see the other reactions of my fellow crewmates, and found Dr. Ganymede engrossed in taking the pulse of Flint, who himself was staring as innocently at the irate Wakeman as he had the inside of the walls of this capsule, whilst the woman had disappeared completely. Days passed by as we became accustomed to our situation, although so we believed, but all was not as good as it felt. Far from it. We were all gathered together in the main chamber to be given some details about what to expect on our new home. The Ori was activated and it flew, as we seemed with it, through the thin atmosphere of the planet Mars, down to the surface where some bits were still red, others looked green and blue like our familiar home, as the terraforming was almost complete. Then we came up to our place of arrival, a place known as the Citadel. This was the area where the civilian population would have been collected and placed before the Earth's demise, had we had enough time to do so. We were also shown a place called the Dome, which was the main observatory, the scientific base where most of the people on Mars were currently housed, carrying out their research and readying the planet for its new inhabitants. It was then all of a sudden that the Ori went bright white and flashed off, leaving the main chamber in complete darkness. Then the lights came back on. We all situated in a circle looked at each other before returning our gaze to the 3 astronauts in charge, Noel Peterson, Joe Miles, and Mark Archer. Mark Archer looked at Noel and then Joe before reassuring us all that it was probably just some computer glitch, but it was far from that, as at that very moment a loud thud reverberated from a distance, and before we could even flinch, speak, talk, or even think what had just occurred, emergency lights lit up and sirens sounded. "What's wrong?" I shouted. Before any of the astronauts had time to answer, the air in the capsule began to get thinner. "Put your oxygen mask on quickly," shouted Mark Archer. We already suited up, reached to our backpacks, which we had been told to carry with us everywhere. Inside, each of us scrabbled for our oxygen mask and placed it on as the air began to be sucked out of the capsule. The vacuum created by the hole in the capsule began to suck out the oxygen at a greater rate. Then the worst possible thing happened. Joe Miles started to panic. At first we thought it was due to the situation, but it was not. He pulled off his mask and started to wave it around We thought him mad, but he was trying to tell us that his mask was not working. As he traced the mask back to his suit, the cable that was permanently attached to the mask had a hole in it, to the part attached to the suit. We watched on as we saw the air in his body being sucked out. His body went so remarkably thin, his face also. He screamed in agony, yet no voice came out. We all looked at each other. One woman started screaming at the very thought that this poor man was dying in front of our eyes, and there was nothing we could do to save him, as to give him one of our masks meant one of us would die. His luck had just run out. The woman continued screaming, saying, "What should we do?" But no one, even the fellow astronauts, said a word in return. He pulled his way as blood ran from his nose and a part of his now open stomach towards us. We all moved back as if someone with a plague was coming towards us, but it was the case of survival of the fittest. He launched himself with what must have been his last bit of energy towards the screaming woman. He placed his bony thin hands on an oxygen mask, trying to pull it off. She turned her head towards us, screaming, "Do I give him some? What do I do?" Mark Archer screamed no. He knew, however uncomfortable it was to say, that if she removed the mask, she too would die. If it had to be the choice of one person or two persons dying, then the terrible decision of only one would have to be made. The woman tried frantically to remove the bony hand off, but she could see what we could not see so clearly. Joe's eyes as they started to protrude, as a vacuum sucked every last bit of air out of him. By now his veins were clearly visible in his body. His head seemed a quarter the size bigger. He was being pulled apart. Finally the astronaut got the mask of the screaming woman, and now her screams were physical, but no longer vocal. It was as if we had become deaf to her very cries. She looked at us as the very air from her very body was too being sucked out. The astronaut sucked in some air, but it appeared to do him no good. We all stood froze, unable to help the screaming woman. We moved to try and push the astronaut off his balance, but we never got the chance. The vacuum intensified. We could only imagine the original hole in the capsule had increased. The man began to levitate in the air, his mouth sucking awkwardly like a man with no teeth on the oxygen mask with its wire outstretched and connected to the screaming woman's suit. "Pull the mask off him, quickly, quickly," I shouted to her, but it was too late. She couldn't do it, and then Joe Miles and the mask, devoid of the wire from the suit, snapped off and was sucked down the corridor, banging the walls out into the void outside. The woman, now centered in the middle, was too being pulled upright to the void outside. Her screaming had ceased. We all looked at her as she took her unfortunate destiny. Unlike the astronaut, she knew her fate and accepted it. She never even tried to come towards us. Her face appeared more mouse-like than before. With that last glance, she whipped out of the room, never to be seen again. We all stood clutching onto any piece of metal attached to the capsule we could, as Mark Archer scrabbled around the walls and sealed the doors of the main chamber, allowing the capsule to maintain the air supply. That night was the hardest in which to gain any sleep, and I am not sure if any of us did. I lay awake as I heard the two surviving astronauts fixing with laser torches the hole in the capsule. I kept recreating the moment of that poor woman's death. That never should have occurred. But we all faced a great dilemma, as the astronauts had confirmed that the capsule's damage was caused by an explosive device that had been removed from the capsule's arsenal and set to explode. This now meant we had brought a killer on board.